when January 1st hits and all of the New Year's bells and whistles are ringing, and we have to pick our words and we have to have our vision boards up yet, I want to invite us to take a moment and maybe this week to not do any of those things. Yeah, not do any of those things. I think that a lot of times we can learn so much about our past, and we can learn so much and get so much perspective about where and how we are going in the future. I'm your host, Dr. Neeta, and I'm going to give you 8 actionable tips so we can start off the year 2025 with intentions and desires. Savor the slow. Savor the moments that happened last year. Starting with January, what went well, the top 2 things that you were proud of, the top 2 things that you were excited about, and the top 2 things that were learning lessons. Maybe they didn't go well. My tip for 2025 is embrace contrast. No matter how future forward or fast forward we are, there is still contrast and there is still duality, and there's beauty in the duality. I'm so excited because we are just going to begin the year going strong. Hey loves, do me a quick favor and hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are tuning into this. It helps grow the show more than you know. Thank you so much again, and enjoy. Have you ever wondered how stepping into a new city or even a sacred space could completely transform the way you see yourself and your relationships? Now, have you had a big dream, a desire, perhaps maybe you've envisioned the places that you want to visit this year, the people that you want to travel with, maybe you want more adventure in your life this year? Well, there's something that I've learned from taking my family of 4, 2 small kids, plus 2 other couples. There was 10 of us on this trip across the country of India. We went to 7 cities and overall 4 big countries. And what I learned about myself in the process and how you, and I'm going to give you 8 actionable tips so we can start off the year 2025 with intentions and desires that will improve and support your relationships and braving your relationships this year and beyond. So now I know you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, how was she able to pull it off? I don't know how I was able to pull it off. I think I'm still recalibrating and kind of recognizing what it took to literally live in a few small luggage bags and making sure, thank God, none of our luggages this time were lost. But I know the question is first, how and why did you decide to travel to 4 countries? I ended up having to see my family in my mom's side of the family in the Philippines this past year. And that was such a beautiful homecoming, and I'll share just a little bit more about that. But when we are thinking about the New Year's, we're often thinking, okay, let's hit the ground running. Let's get all of our goals intact. Let's do all of the things that we didn't get to do in 2024. And it's all about writing our goals that we want in every area of our life. And while all of this is true, I want to invite us to take a moment and maybe this week to not do any of those things. Yeah, not do any of those things. I would instead love for you to reflect on this past year. What went right? What didn't go as well? And I would love for you to do an inner audit for yourself. And why am I starting it out this way? Because I think that a lot of times we can learn so much about our past, and we can learn so much and get so much perspective about where and how we are going in the future. And this is so underrated because I think that a lot of times when January 1st hits and all of the New Year's bells and whistles are ringing, and we have to pick our word, and we have to do this, and we have to have our vision boards up yet. And if you haven't, then you're lazy, you're a loser, you're not working hard enough. And then it starts this anxiety. And I want to practice for all of you to savor the slow, savor the moments that happened last year. and do your own audit, starting with January. What went well? The top 2 things that you were proud of, the top 2 things that you were excited about, and the top 2 things that were learning lessons. Maybe they didn't go well. Maybe you learned something about yourself. Maybe it was a challenge or challenges. Because what I know is that when we operate at braving new frontiers and getting ready to envision the highest possible version of ourselves for us to walk into and step into for the year ahead, we've got to be able to celebrate and come from that lens and that frequency of what actually happened, what actually went right, and to learn from the things that didn't go right as well. And in preparing for this episode, I had so many juicy things that I wanted to talk about. And what really inspired this was I had so many people asking, how and why do you do it? I wouldn't take my kids traveling until they're like 7 years old and above. How did you do it? Especially traveling to, countries like India and some of the smaller cities. If you've never traveled abroad before, and, I wouldn't necessarily pick India as your first country to travel if you've never traveled before. We actually traveled with 2 people who had never set foot outside of the US besides Mexico, and that doesn't really count. And so it was interesting. And then we had 2 other friends who were expert travelers. They'd been backpacking across Asia and Europe for years. And then we had my 2 kids, and they didn't have any children. So it was a whole navigation of the different arenas of where people were at. And the first lesson that I want to bring up is, if you didn't listen to my Christmas episode, I'm going to link that also in the show notes. But we have to rediscover our inner child. And that's the first one. And I learned this lesson from just navigating Jaipur. Jaipur is such a bustling, rich city. It's full of old opulence because it was one of the cities in Rajasthan that is very regal and royal with all of the palaces. It also happens to be where my in-laws are from, where my husband spent most of his early years growing up in. And we take our kids there every year to see all of their family on their dad's side. And even though it was like a very short visit this year, going through the vibrant colors of Jaipur's bazaars and immersing myself in the artistic traditions, but also taking my kids to some of their favorite palaces, because we have a few now, and just looking at the artwork. I know my kids are getting a little bit older, but from looking at the little peacocks kind of flaring their wings to running around and chasing them on the palace grounds, it just reminded me of so much joy that can happen when we allow ourselves to pause, and when we allow ourselves to allow being silly and not being so serious and not taking ourselves so seriously. And while my kids were often very much looked at because they aren't royal or regal by any means, they are very loud. And, we allow them to express fully, whether it's a meltdown, whether it's, and our parenting style is, very different than what we tend to see in those parts of the world. And it was just a reminder that, okay, we are choosing to do this differently. And so my tip for you for this year is, can you reconnect with your sense of self by engaging in play, or maybe coloring, or getting yourself, I know there's studies now. There's a study that has shown that when you're coloring, it activates different parts of our brain, because our brain is so always in beta mode that when we get into our alpha brain waves, our alpha brain states, just by activating the left part of our brain, by doing something creative, by doing something fun, by doing something that allows that hand-eye coordination. And this could be crocheting, this can be knitting, this can also be building or making bracelets with your fingers and hands. All of the things that now we do. My kids have Play-Doh, and there's the sensory experience that we can have, but it also activates different parts of our brain. And it also allows parts of our brain to go into rest mode. It activates our alpha brainwaves because our beta brainwaves are kind of in that beta go, go, go mode, having to solve problems and crises. But if we are more into our alpha, we're actually getting those good brain proteins that allow ourselves to then be more active for the things and the problem solving and the skills that we actually want. It actually allows us to be more creative. And so can we be more creative this year by doing more mundane things with our hands? Whether it's baking, whether it's gardening, what can you do for yourself? And you don't have to travel all the way across the world to learn this tip, but what can we do that can activate that part of our brain to be more in that childlike awe state of mind? Okay, number 2, prioritize reflection in the most spiritual of spaces. When we traveled to Amritsar, India, the Golden Temple, and I have been there quite a few times growing up. I remember the first time traveling there, I was a little bit older than Ari, and he was 6. I think I was about 8 or 10. And I mean, I've been to a lot of the very sacred temples, and, some of them, in fact, all of them that I had been to, you have to remove your shoes before even setting foot. And I remember very vividly, and this is one memory that I still carried, even heading to the Golden Temple this year, was we were getting ready to take our shoes off. And I just remember putting my feet in what would be the coldest of cold water. And literally that memory is anchored in me that every time I go into a cold plunge, I often get kind of transplaced back into when I was a little girl going into these temples for the very first time. And it was cold. I think we had gone in January where it's really cold in India and there's not really heat, but we wanted to get the blessings from, whatever temples that we went to at the time. And so when I took my kids to the Golden Temple and we had to cover our heads, and literally the first thing that you do when you not just get into the temple, but when you get inside of the temple halls, there is this reverence and this energy that is so potent and so palpable that you immediately just kind of go into a sacred space within yourself. I can't quite put the words to it, but it was very different while taking my children there because they also have their own feels. They're 3 and 6, and I know a lot of parents would be like, I would never take them there. They're too young. They're not going to appreciate it. And honestly, I felt like we were already going to be in that part of the world because of a family wedding. And why not? And my husband, being Jain, he'd never been to the Golden Temple, which is the holiest place in the world for Sikhs. And it was just the hymns that were being sung, the hymns that were being played throughout this beautiful space. And with all of the people that were traveling with us, it couldn't be the most perfect backdrop until we were asked to remove our shoes. And so you're walking barefoot in all of, the grounds before you even wait in line. And this line is about an hour and a half to get into the temple to see and hear the sacred hymns and readings from the sacred book of Guru Nanak. And it's so beautiful. The whole area is kind of drenched and draped in gold, as it's called the Golden Temple. And my youngest, my daughter, who's 3, she has an issue with things on her feet. And I had forgotten this, but it totally reminded me of my little girl as well, who was deathly afraid of this cold water that we had to walk through to wash our feet to get out. And literally this was, throughout all of these temples. So as we are taking my daughter's shoes off, she's like, but Mama, I'm going to step in yucky things. And I said, no, you're not. It's going to be clean. But of course, I don't know what she's going to be stepping on because clearly the entire area is completely barefoot. And it just struck me at that moment that she's going to have her own memories of this place. Good or bad, we can only do so much. And we can set the foundation of what we want to pass on. But essentially, it's their journey. And essentially, we get to have our own journey. And this time coming back, Not only was I reminded when I was putting my feet in the water, crossing, there's this area where you cross that literally is kind of a river for all of us to put our feet in there. I know it's not somebody for those who also have a fear of foot fungus or any of that. It's probably going to trigger that. But I can't imagine a more beautiful and sacred way to begin the new year. And whether, you want to create those anchored moments in perhaps visiting something sacred, or maybe creating an altar in your own home, creating a puja area in your own home, creating something where it gives you a sense of peace. Later in the beginning of, or in this latter half of this year, I finally kind of put together our little prayer room in our home in Austin. And it was something that was on my mind for a really long time. And finally, we were able to do that. And it was just because the intention was so high that every time I go into this room, this particular room of my home, instantly, I feel like I can drop into a meditation so fast. And I want to invite this tip for you to embrace in 2025 for you is create your own space for reflection. It doesn't have to be going to the Golden Temple. It doesn't have to be that, some of these anchored moments of you taking off your shoes or putting your face in cold water, or maybe a cold plunge is sacred for you. But what can you do that will anchor yourself so that you are allowing yourself for a deeper connection with yourself this year? Okay, number 3, embrace abundance in all of its forms without losing connection. Now, we love Dubai. And one big lesson from being here in Dubai is we love the hustle and bustle. We love that it's such a future forward city. It's so forward in so many arenas. Some of you are watching my stories, and I posted something earlier or latter of end of the year. When I went to visit the doctor, I went to a doctor's clinic, and literally it was like going into some space in the future. Everything was on these huge screens that they blast in the clinic, and everything is so clean and minimalist, and you're checking in on a giant computer screen that is larger, it's like 2 feet high. I mean, higher than myself. And everything is so seamless. You're getting these text messages. There's no paper anywhere. It was like going to the future. You're being greeted by a robot. I mean, it was insane. And from the dazzling skyscrapers that you see and the ultra luxury that you see of Dubai, you also see some of the beauty and the expansiveness just from the people. And that's what I think is drawing so many people here to Dubai, is the beauty of just the different nationalities, the different people from different countries, all being here, all in a place where there is so much reverence for growth, potential, possibilities, expansion at every level. So while there's so much abundance and luxury and opulence at your feet, there's also this sense of richness in relationships, because just taking my kids out to the park and to some of the kids' museums, you're meeting friends, because a lot of people here are expats and they're also like-minded, just like you, wanting to build connection and wanting to grow themselves in a particular way, whether it's in their business or in their personal growth or in their wellness or what have you. And it reminds us that being in Dubai here right now, that it's not just about material wealth, but it's the richness of the relationships, the people that you allow and let into your life. So my tip for 2025 is, can you nurture abundance in your own connections, meaning deepen and foster, or maybe even think about the people that you want to go deeper with, because just by being in their presence, they give you that sense of abundance. They give you that sense of richness because of the depth that they offer you. It's something to think about. Now, tip number 4, learn the power of belonging. And this is a lesson that I learned from Jaisalmer, India, from going to and attending the Belong Festival. It was a beautiful festival. It was 3 days. And I took the participants in how to really cultivate meaningful connections. And we also had a women's circle on the power of allowing to feel our rage, our anger, our full emotional range. And while we were in the desert, I witnessed the profound impact of so many people who shared similar stories of when they didn't feel like they belonged and when they actually did feel the true essence of connection. And this was a sacred space that we created for 3 days because each of us wanted to be part of not only this festival and dance hall by night, but this beautiful way where we were all connecting on a very deep level. And so my tip for 2025 here is seek out opportunities to share your story and listen to others. And this is so powerful because if you are seeking more valuable and vulnerable relationships, we have got to go first. We have got to go first. And whether it's community events, whether it's you starting your own event, I'm going to link in the show notes a freebie for you where I will give you my guide to create your own soul support posse. It's a 16-page ebook where you can go ahead and create your own gatherings, your small circles, and so that you can be the leader and the light in the places where maybe people are also wanting to find connection and belonging in 2025. Now, number 5, find beauty in tradition and simplicity. Now, one of the lessons I learned from going to Jaipur, India, which, by the way, wow, my most favorite cities in all of India and Rajasthan, and I've been to quite a few actually. I think Jaipur is definitely on the top. Rajasthan is definitely on the top, and it's not because my husband's from there, but there is just so much rich history. And I think oftentimes when we're in a fast-paced society or a fast-paced world, we forget the beauty in rituals. We forget the beauty in ceremony. We forget the beauty in creating our everyday rituals that are sacred to us. And I know that many of you have been following me, have been seeing how I create my chai rituals every day, how I actually use this as part of meditation. And in Jaipur, there are these blue-hued streets. It's called the Blue City for a reason. And the stories there were ones of resilience and simplicity, but the traditions of the city go back thousands of years old. But it's the importance in grounding ourselves in rituals. There's a ritual for everything. And going to some of the palaces in Jaipur, I was thrown a rose ceremony when I was entering some of these places. People were throwing rose petals at me, and I was just adorned and greeted in these beautiful rituals before entering a new place or entering a new home, somebody's home. And it was just the power of sacred rituals that we can create in our home to make us feel more welcomed and to even connect back to ourselves. Now, number 6 and tip 6. This is my favorite one because forgive and let go. One of the lessons I learned from being in Manila and going back home to the motherland, my mom's birthplace, after 6 years, Manila is so lively and its streets pulse with resilience. And there are people that have hearts of gold there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I remember like coming here as a teenager and literally because all of the matriarchs in my family, when my mother passed away, my, Mama Chi and my Mama Femi, my Lola, which is my grandmother on my mom's side, it was the last time that I had seen her was actually before she passed away in the Philippines. And she was one of the people that cared for me the most while growing up, her and my bua, my aunt, and my other aunt, Mama Chi. And I could just hear the whispers of some of the things that I had wished I had said to her. And of course, there were memories that were coming back that really brought me to tears because I was coming back now 6 years later, and it had been, or 6 years, 8 years later, and it had been such a long time, but now I'm coming back, now having 2 kids, and as a mom as well, reconnecting with my mom's sister and a lot of my cousins, becoming an elder while visiting. And I couldn't help but have tears because of wishing that I probably had more connection with some of my relatives in the Philippines, but also wishing that my grandmother and my aunts could have met my kids. And so it just reminds us of, can you forgive yourself and let go? Forgive yourself of what didn't go well or what you couldn't control or the things that didn't go in the right alignment in time. And so my tip for you this year is, can you reflect on things that didn't go as planned? And can you forgive yourself in the process? I think a lot of times it's hard to forgive maybe the other person, but it's the way that we can actually forgive the situation and move forward. And I think that's the biggest liberation that you can give yourself, is by forgiving yourself in the process. Now, tip number 7 that I've learned is building bridges across our differences. And one of the things that I learned from traveling to Chandigarh is one of the most modern cities in all of India. I feel like I just fell in love with this city and town. It's about 3 hours north of India via Delhi by train, sorry. And it's one of these places, it was designed by a French architect. So the entire city is planned kind of similar to how Paris architecture is. There's a lot of roundabouts, and it was done very strategically to create belonging and community in different sectors. And I was able to, meet and reconnect with my podcast editing team there. And I hadn't seen them in quite a few years, actually, all of us together at the same time. Shout out to Ranbir and Arvind Ji. And Chandigarh reminded me of the balance of modern aspects of where we are and tradition all in one, and that harmony can be possible even when we have contrast. Because, while for me it was like the cleanest city and we had a lot of parks and the beauty there was unmatched, and it is in the foothills of the Himalayas, and you could do a day trip up to the hill stations if you wanted to, and we really wanted to, but it just reminded me how the charm of the old and the new was kept. And so my tip for 2025 is embrace contrast. I think India in general, as a whole, reminds me of this so much, that you can have the most luxurious spot with right next to people begging on the street for food. And you have this dichotomy, and it reminds me so much of, no matter how future forward or fast forward we are, that there is still contrast, and there is still duality, and there's beauty in the duality, and there's beauty in having even disagreements with other people, and there's beauty in having conflict, because in conflict we learn that we can build bridges. In conflict we learn that we can actually see the commonality, the common ground, to create harmony again. And so if you are thinking that, oh, I'm just going to stop talking to this person, or I'm just going to, I'm not going to spend time with that person, can you actually have a brave conversation with them instead? Can you actually find a common ground? Because duality and contrast is so beautiful. It reminds us that we need heartbreak in order to experience joy. We need the sadness in order to experience and appreciate the happy times in our lives. And finally, one of my last tips for you in ushering in a powerful 2025, and what I learned from my travels, is creating those sacred moments of connection back with yourself and with others this year. And whether you are navigating this year solo, alone, single, trying to figure out your new you, or stepping into a more juicy version of yourself this year, one of the things that I learned from Jalandhar and even Delhi, I have so many of my relatives there, and although we were just kind of stopping over there in a stopover, but even in Jalandhar, whether it was sharing chai with several of my family members, going to the family wedding that we went to, and taking some of my friends with. I mean, this couldn't have been a more traditional wedding right from the pin, but it was so beautiful. We stayed in such a beautiful Airbnb where the hosts were so welcoming. They took care of us like we were their family, and they were planning every step for us. It was just like we were being taken care of as if they were our family members. And so it was just the importance of paying small acts of kindness, even for the people that maybe you don't know yet. Maybe you're moving to another city, or this is a new season in life that you want to get to know other people in the moms group. Put yourself out there. Your tip for 2025, and this is what I'll leave you with, is treat your small interactions, even the smallest interactions, whether it's with a partner, a friend, or a stranger, as something sacred. You know, we're all passing ships sometimes. That person that you meet while crossing the street, or that person that delivers your orders, perhaps maybe pass forward a note of gratitude or a deep connection or a thank you or a heartfelt gratitude, because these moments sometimes are fleeting, but perhaps maybe they can be for longer moments of connection if we allow it. And so these are my 8 tips for just allowing you to step into the most potent, most expansive, most growth-oriented version of yourself when we take time to actually reflect and think of how this past year has affected you, and how perhaps maybe your past travels or the things that you want to do this year, how you want to do it maybe differently than last year, and what went well, what do you want to duplicate in this upcoming year. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time on the Brave Table. If you love this episode and you want to be one of the first to drop comments, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, on iTunes. It helps us grow the show more than you know. And I'm so honored to take you through this week after week. I promise to give you the most valuable content and bring even more valuable guests in 2025. Thank you so much. It has meant the world to me that we are entering our 3rd year, and I'm so excited to be on your journey to be more brave in all areas of your life. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time.